Well, just moments ago, the defense rested its case in the Alex Murdaugh murder trial. Today, jurors heard from the defendant's brother, John Marvin.
The defense called John Marvin to the stand as its 14th and likely final witness.
Our Nick Neville is live outside of the Colleton County Courthouse. Nick, tell us about some of the key takeaways in this testimony today. I know he got emotional at times.
Yes, he did, Judy and Dondi. So John Marvin testified that Alex Murdaugh was a loving husband and father. He said that his boys, Buster and Paul, were always his #1 priority. He also acknowledged that though Maggie and Alex's relationship did have hiccups, he said it was a good marriage. He also said that he'd have to create a new word to describe how distraught Alex was after the killings. John Marvin Murdaugh described the moments when his brother told him that Maggie and Paul were killed.
Alex called me and just absolutely hysterical. As soon as I heard his voice, I knew something bad was going on. Didn't know what.
He says he went to the kennels the day after the murders with blood still all over the crime scene.
Felt like it was the right thing to do. I felt like I owed him, and I started cleaning. And I can promise you, no mother or father or aunt or uncle should ever have to see and do what I did that day. It's the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life.
He also says the family was extremely cooperative throughout the investigation, and he was baffled by the law enforcement release shortly after the killings that said there wasn't a danger to the public. Earlier, the defense called crime scene analyst Timothy Palmback to the stand, who said that in his expert opinion, he believes 2 shooters killed Maggie and Paul.
My opinion is the totality of the evidence is more suggestive of a 2-shooter scenario. Well, I think minimally, that shooter is getting covered with this material, getting more or less the shock wave of that effect. Therefore, I think that particular shooter, for a brief period of time, is kind of out of this. It's not as if they can instantaneously suffer that, drop the shotgun, run to wherever the blackout rifle is, pick that up, and then in any kind of a reasonable time period engage in a meaningful assault.
Palmback also testified to a key element of the defense's case, which is that the investigation was shoddy and SLED possibly missed evidence. He mentioned possible footprints in the feed room. He also backed up testimony from previous state witnesses who testified that Paul did not have any defensive wounds. Greg Adeline is standing by. We want to get to him with some new information we learned today. Jurors, Greg, are actually going to be heading to Moselle in the coming days.
Yeah, that's right, Nick. And there were rumblings about the jury possibly heading to Moselle earlier on in this trial. Today, it became a reality. Ultimately, the jurors will head to that property as testimony concludes. The defense just now resting their case. We expect some prosecution rebuttal witnesses to come in the next day, 4 or 5 of them. But also we expect this jury visit to happen here probably tomorrow, maybe even Wednesday, before the closing arguments begin in this case. Jurors will be able to head to that 1,700-acre property and take a look at the scene of the murders, June the 7th, 2021. Paul and Maggie Murdaugh murdered at the kennels. They'll be able to go to the kennels and take a look for themselves. Jurors will be accompanied by law enforcement. That trip, again, happening probably within the next 24 to 48 hours. Now, the prosecution didn't seem very warm to this idea, to be perfectly honest. They'd much rather keep the jury in that courtroom, but Judge Newman ruled that he will allow it. Jurors will not be allowed in the house. They can't take any photos. There won't be any explanations or presentations out there by either side. Just simply visit and observe and rely on prior testimony to draw any conclusions. Now, as for what conclusions they might draw, well, that's anyone's guess. But one thing they will likely gauge is the distance from the kennels to the house, and they'll weigh all of the factors in this case and compare the scene itself with the testimony that they've heard. Here's Judge Newman explaining his decision from the get-go earlier this morning.
If either side wants a jury view, the court will arrange a jury view, and the court will go. The lawyers may go if you want to go. The course, there are so many lawyers. That's a mammoth team in of itself. And I can advise the jury as part of the going to the scene that the certain things may not be the same as they were 2 years ago.
And so again, the defense has just now rested its case. We expect rebuttal witnesses from the prosecution to take the stand tomorrow. Again, 4 or 5 witnesses are expected to take the stand, and then closing arguments set to begin on Wednesday. We'll have much more from John Marvin Murdaugh's testimony. He was the final defense witness that took the stand, had some very interesting things